The battlefield was a wasteland of smoldering craters and bodies, some still twitching, others reduced to ash. The twin suns of the planet Veralis 5 hung high in the sky, their merciless rays beating down on the war-torn valley. Two warring factions, the Terracans and the Zyandar, had fought for centuries, their war fueled by territorial greed and ancient grudges. But today, something far more terrifying than battle had shaken them to their cores. They had seen it with their own eyes. The midday heatwave had come, just as it did every cycle, a brutal surge of radiation that forced both armies to retreat underground or risk burning alive. The Terracans, with their thick reptilian hides, could last a little longer, but even they could feel their flesh blistering after minutes of exposure. The Zyandar, their pale, insectoid exoskeletons designed for darkness, fared even worse. But the humans had walked into the burning light. And nothing happened. General Vortak of the Terracan Dominion stood in the shade of a collapsed transport, his slitted eyes locked onto the battlefield. Across the scorched plains, 5 human soldiers, unarmored, uncovered, stood amidst the corpses, seemingly unaffected. Their pale skin did not crack. Their flesh did not smoke. They stood, breathing heavily, their weapons at the ready, as if nothing about the 2 blazing suns concerned them at all. Impossible, Vortak whispered. His second-in-command, Nektal, let out a guttural hiss beside him. They do not burn, General. The suns should be melting their fragile bodies, yet they stand. Across the battlefield, the Zyandar commander, Clixier, had witnessed the same unnatural sight. From the safety of his underground command bunker, he replayed the footage again and again on his holoscreen, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. This defies logic, one of his science officers chittered. No species can endure the radiation surge unprotected. Even the strongest among us cannot last more than a few minutes. Yet the humans had been standing there for an hour. Clixier knew humans were resilient, they had fought beside them in previous skirmishes, but this was something else. Have we misunderstood their nature? Clixier wondered aloud. What if they are not what they claim to be? The thought sent a cold shiver down his carapace. Meanwhile, the human soldiers were oblivious to the shock they had caused. Commander Dallin, leading the small scouting unit, pulled out a water canister and took a long sip before turning to his men. All right, boys, the radiation should be dropping soon. Let's move out before they decide to start shooting again. A chuckle ran through the group as they stretched under the suns, completely unaware that they had just become the most feared beings on this planet. Vortak watched them disappear into the distance, his mind reeling. The war had changed. This wasn't just about territory anymore. It was about understanding the creatures that walked in the fire and did not burn. The news spread like wildfire across Veralis 5. Scouts and battlefield observers from both the Terracan Dominion and the Zyandar Collective had reported the same baffling event. Humans had walked through the burning midday light, completely unharmed. At first, the generals refused to believe it. Some suspected faulty recording equipment, others called it battlefield deception. But the more they watched the footage, the harder it became to deny. The humans did not burn. Within hours, high command from both sides demanded immediate reports. The Terracan warlords assembled in their subterranean citadel, where the very walls pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Vortak, still shaken from what he had witnessed, addressed his superiors. I saw it myself, he growled, his voice low. No shielding. No armor. No protective field. They stood in the radiation surge as if it were nothing. His words were met with silence. Finally, High Lord Zarkul, a massive Terracan elder with golden battle scars crisscrossing his scaled face, leaned forward. You speak of impossibilities, Vortak. This world has burned our ancestors for generations. No creature can survive unprotected under these suns. Vortak clenched his jaw. And yet, they did. Across the planet, in the deep hives of the Zyandar Collective, a similar discussion unfolded. Commander Clixier stood before the High Mind, the ruling intelligence of the insectoid species. Unlike the Terracans, the ZYNR operated through collective decision-making, each high-ranking official connected by a neural web. The humans endured, Clixier stated plainly. The hive chamber buzzed with uneasy chittering. This cannot be, the high mind responded. Either they possess unseen technology, or they are not what they appear to be. Clixier hesitated before speaking. There is another possibility. The chamber went silent. The neural web pulsed as thousands of minds focused on his next words. What if the humans have evolved differently? What if their bodies have adapted to withstand what we cannot? The idea was absurd. The galaxy knew of no species immune to such brutal solar radiation. And yet, study them, the high mind ordered. Observe. Test if necessary. But we must understand what they are before we make our next move. Meanwhile, in the human camp, Commander Dallin sat beneath the shade of their temporary outpost, checking the reports on his datapad. His team had no idea of the chaos their presence had caused among their so-called allies. Looks like the Terracans and ZYNR are both pulling back their front lines, said Sergeant Yelton, peering through his binoculars. Good, Dallin muttered. That means less fighting and more breathing room for us. But sir, Yelton hesitated, isn't it weird? They've been trying to slaughter each other for centuries, and suddenly, they decide to stop? Dallin exhaled. Yeah. That's weird. What none of them knew was that both factions had just declared an unofficial ceasefire. Not because they wanted peace, but because they wanted to study the humans. The galaxy had always assumed humans were fragile. But today, that assumption was broken. And some feared that it was only the beginning. The war had paused. Not because of peace. Not because of diplomacy. But because of fear. For the first time in their long history, the Terracans and ZYNR had stopped fighting, not to negotiate, but to understand something far more dangerous than their war. Humans. The reports had reached the Galactic Coalition, the neutral governing body overseeing conflicts between species. They, too, were skeptical. Could it be an advanced shielding system? A new type of bioengineering? Or something else? There was only one way to find out. Testing. In the Terracan stronghold, General Vortak oversaw the first experiment in the underground chambers of the Dominion. The human, Lieutenant Arden, sat calmly in the metal observation room, unaware that every inch of his body was being scanned by Terracan scientists. The reptilian researchers murmured as the data streamed in. No abnormalities detected. One whispered. Scan again, another barked. For hours, they searched for something, anything, that could explain how this human had survived the radiation. But his biology was normal. Finally, a frustrated researcher growled, perhaps we must conduct a live test. A heavy silence filled the room. Vortak narrowed his eyes. Elaborate. We expose him, the scientist said. Directly. In a controlled chamber. If he burns, we will know it was a deception. If he does not. Vortak exhaled slowly. Prepare the chamber. Meanwhile, in the ZYNR research hive, Commander Clixier watched the human test subject through a reinforced glass panel. Corporal Yuan, a member of the same human squad that had walked untouched through the battlefield, stretched lazily in the observation room. Clixier's antennae twitched. The human did not seem afraid. He did not even seem curious. Instead, he looked bored. Clixier turned to his lead scientist. Have you found anything unusual? The insectoid researcher, hunched over an array of bioscanners, responded, negative, Commander. No shielding. No hidden implants. No cybernetic enhancements. Clixier tapped his claw against the glass. Increase the temperature. Let's see what happens. A warning flashed on the control panel, solar intensity level rising. Inside the chamber, the heat climbed dangerously fast. Any ZYNR subjected to this level of radiation would be screaming, their chitinous exoskeletons peeling away. "Corporal Ewan?" He yawned. Clixier felt unease spread through his exoskeleton. "This is not normal," he muttered. The scientist hesitated. "Commander, what if this is normal? What if humans truly do not burn?" In the human outpost. Sergeant Yelton wiped the sweat from his forehead as he monitored the radar. "Sir," he called to Commander Dallin, "something's off. The Terracans and Zyandar haven't attacked in days, but they've been watching us." Dallin frowned. "Define watching." Yelton pointed at the monitors. Red dots, Terracan scouts, lingered on the outskirts of their camp. Blue dots, Zyandar observers, were just as close. "They're circling us like vultures," Yelton muttered. Dallin's gut told him something was very wrong. "They're not watching us," he said slowly. "They're studying us." A heavy silence fell in the command tent. Then, from the radio, a new transmission crackled through, one that sent chills down their spines. "Human soldiers missing. 2 captured by unknown forces. Repeat, 2 humans unaccounted for." Dallin's hands clenched into fists. It was no longer just an observation. The experiments had begun. The Galactic Council was in chaos. For weeks, there had been quiet discussions and private investigations, but now, it was clear, something was happening that the galaxy was unprepared for. The humans had become the central focus of the universe's most powerful factions. They had stopped fighting, not because they wanted peace, but because they needed answers. The experiments had escalated. Both the Terracan Dominion and the Zyandar Collective had begun taking human soldiers for their tests. It had started with small groups, scientists and biologists observing the unprotected humans in extreme environments, but soon, they pushed further. Invasive procedures, pain simulations, and more. They were desperate to understand the human body. To understand why they could survive what no one else could. And now, the humans were starting to fight back. In the Terracan stronghold, General Vortak paced back and forth in his private quarters, his mind racing. He couldn't ignore it any longer, the disappearing humans were a sign. There had been no word from their scientists, and the experiments were becoming more aggressive. What were they hiding? His communications officer entered quickly, a worried expression across his face. "General, the humans are growing restless. They've demanded an explanation for their treatment." Vortak paused, turning to face the officer. "And what did we say?" "We told them it was for their own good. That the research would help them in the long run." Vortak narrowed his eyes. "And do we believe that?" The officer hesitated. "No, sir." Vortak's fist slammed against the wall. "This will not end well." The humans were not fragile. They had shown that in their calm defiance against the heat of the twin suns. But there was something else, something beyond biology. The way they handled the situation. The intensity in their eyes. The way they refused to be cowed. They were not just survivors, they were calculating. If the humans turned against them, they would be facing more than just a species, they would be facing an unpredictable force. Vortak's thoughts were interrupted by a communication signal. He took a deep breath and answered. A holographic image of the human commander, Dallin, appeared before him, standing tall with an unreadable expression. "We need to talk." Dallin's voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension in his words. "Talk?" Vortak growled. "What is there to talk about? You're nothing but lab subjects in our hands." Dallin's eyes narrowed, his posture stiffening. "I disagree. But that's not the point, General. We're offering you a chance. We want to make an agreement. A truce." Vortak blinked. "A truce? After all this? You demand peace after our treatment of your people?" Dallin's voice remained even, despite the situation. "We don't want war. We want to help you. To help all of you, before it's too late." Vortak's head tilted slightly. He hadn't expected this. Humans were known for their resilience, but not for their mercy. You think you can offer us something? You think you understand what we need? We do, Dallin responded firmly. We're not like you. We don't burn. We're not here to dominate you. But we can help you survive what you've always feared. Back in the ZYNR hive, Commander Clixier was still stunned by the developments. The humans had been taken for testing by the ZYNR, yet they had continued to remain unaffected by the radiation, even when exposed to lethal doses. It was clear now, they had to be hiding something. You said they had no enhancements. No implants, Clixier said coldly to the lead scientist. Correct, Commander. There is no sign of anything unnatural in their biology. The scientist hesitated. But Commander, what if their ability to withstand the suns is something deeper? What if it's not just physiology, but something we cannot even comprehend? Clixier's mandibles clicked nervously. The thought was disturbing. How could any species evolve to withstand such extremes? The ZYNR were adapted to darkness and cold, but their biology could not handle the intense radiation of Veralis 5. No species could. We need answers, now, Clixier growled. The human perspective. Commander Dallin stared into the vast sky of Veralis 5, his hands resting on the controls of his shuttle. His men were waiting, confused and uncertain. There had been no answer from the Terracans or ZYNR yet, but he could feel it, things were shifting. The tension in the air was palpable. It was a strange feeling. To know that the galaxy had turned its eyes on them, not with admiration, but with fear. And the question that lingered in Dallin's mind was simple: what would happen when the galaxy realized that humans were not just survivors of the sun's wrath, but something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine? The tension between the humans and the galaxy was reaching a boiling point. Every faction was trying to understand the humans, not to negotiate, but to control them. ZYNR and Terracans were no longer concerned about fighting each other. Their focus had shifted entirely to the humans. What could they gain from these creatures who defied the laws of nature itself? Commander Dallin stared at the transmission from the Galactic Council, his face cold. The offer was clear: the humans could give their knowledge and technology freely, or face the consequences of an even larger galactic war. The message was simple. The humans had become a commodity. A weapon. In the ZYNR hive, the ZYNR were growing more and more uneasy. The High Mind, the supreme intelligence that governed their hive, had made its decision. It no longer cared for diplomacy. They were now ready to forcefully extract whatever knowledge the humans possessed. Clixier stood before the High Mind, his antennae stiff and trembling. The ZYNR were prepared to go to extreme lengths to obtain the answers they sought about human resilience. They would capture more humans, perform savage tests, and find whatever secrets they could. This is our only option, Clixier said, his voice tinged with a cold resolve. We must unlock what they hide. If we don't act now, the humans may grow too powerful to control. The High Mind responded in its chilling, mechanical voice. The humans are unpredictable. It is unwise to push them further. We risk more than we gain. But Clixier was undeterred. His mind had already made the decision. The ZYNR would not be deterred from discovering the truth. The question remained: would they be able to break the humans? Or would the humans break them first? Back in the Terracan stronghold, General Vortak was equally divided. The Terracans, much like the ZYNR, had begun a covert operation to capture human soldiers for further study. But unlike the ZYNR, Vortak had begun to see humans as something more than lab subjects. They were resilient, unpredictable, and perhaps even worthy of respect. He had to choose. Should the Terracans push the humans into a corner, hoping to extract their knowledge? Or should they consider alliances, as unlikely as that might seem? General, his advisor spoke softly, breaking the silence, what are we doing? We cannot just play with the humans like we do with other species. They are too powerful. The tests, they were meant to be temporary. Vortak turned toward him sharply. Do you think we can afford to ignore them? The humans have already proven their strength. He turned back to the view outside his stronghold. The human soldiers, calm as ever, marched through the barren landscape of Veralis 5. They did not burn. And perhaps that was more dangerous than anything else. The humans planned their next move. In their temporary outpost, Commander Dallin and his team were discussing the situation at hand. The Galactic Council's transmission was troubling. The offer they had received was not truly an offer at all. It was a demand disguised as a gesture of goodwill. The humans knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about their place in the galaxy. The question on Dallin's mind was simple: were they going to be treated as equals? Or would the galaxy turn them into weapons, tools to be used and discarded? The humans weren't fragile. They weren't weak. They could endure far more than their enemies could imagine. And the galaxy would have to understand that. Whether they liked it or not. We'll offer them something, Dallin said, looking at his men. But it won't be what they expect. Sergeant Yelton raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, sir? We'll help them, Dallin said, but on our terms. We won't give them the answers they seek, not without understanding them first. They think we're the ones who should be afraid of them. Let's show them how wrong they are. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the Galactic Council was receiving reports of a strange, growing resistance from the humans. It wasn't a military movement, not yet. But the way they stood, the way they refused to cower, had begun to spread through the other species in the galaxy. What the Council had feared was happening: the humans were becoming something more than just another species in the galaxy. They were becoming symbols of something far more powerful than any weapon. They were becoming symbols of resilience. And that was something no one had anticipated. The Terracans and Zyandar, though still focused on their studies, were beginning to question their approach. Were they underestimating the humans? Was this war, this testing, just the first step towards something far more dangerous? The galaxy was on the edge. And no one knew what would happen next. The tensions in the galaxy had reached a breaking point. Both the Terracans and Zyandar had continued their aggressive research into the humans, but the fear was palpable now. What if they were getting too close? What if they had already crossed a line that could never be undone? For the first time, humans weren't just participating in the galaxy's conflicts, they were changing the very rules of the game. In the Terracan stronghold, General Vortak stood in front of the massive holographic map in his war room, observing the shifting patterns of the galaxy. The Terracan Dominion had always been aggressive, powerful, and relentless, but now, with the humans in the equation, things had changed. The previous assumptions were shattered. The humans were not as fragile as once believed. They weren't even truly biological in the way Vortak had assumed. His mind raced. Every experiment they had conducted had returned the same result: nothing. No signs of enhancement. No artificial implants. No sign of any protective technology. The humans had something far more terrifying: resilience. And Vortak couldn't decide if that made them a threat, or something else. One of his lieutenants, Nektal, entered the room. General, the Zyandar have made their move. They're demanding more human subjects for testing. If we don't act soon, they'll have access to all the information we've gathered. Vortak turned to him sharply. Do we give it to them? Nektal hesitated. We could, but we risk everything. If we hand over the humans' secrets to the Zyandar, they'll have everything they need to break them, and we'll be left with nothing. They'll come for us next. Vortak growled. And if we don't, we'll face a war we're not prepared for. The general rubbed his chin, his thoughts clouded. The Zyandar were a threat, but humans were proving themselves to be something even more dangerous. Meanwhile, on the human outpost, Commander Dallin sat in the corner of the briefing room, staring out at the alien landscape of Veralis 5, lost in thought. The humans had faced their greatest challenge yet, not just from the alien forces, but from the very galaxy that feared their strength. Every message, every transmission from the Galactic Council had made it clear, humanity was seen as a weapon, something to be controlled. And yet, Dallin knew they couldn't let that happen. They wouldn't become tools for anyone. The galaxy could think what it wanted, but the humans had one advantage the others didn't. They understood survival. They weren't just a species born of violence or strength. They were a species that had endured endless challenges. That had adapted. That had overcome. And now, they were ready to show the galaxy what true endurance looked like. The door slid open, and Sergeant Yelton entered, carrying a set of new orders. He tossed the papers onto the table in front of Dallin. "Sir, the Terracans have called for a meeting," Yelton said. "They want to negotiate." "Negotiate?" Dallin raised an eyebrow. "With us?" Yelton nodded. "It's a truce, but not for peace. They want to learn from us, about our resistance. They want us to reveal the secrets of our biology." Dallin's mind raced. The humans had not just survived the radiation, they had evolved to stand unscathed under the brutal rays of the twin suns of Veralis 5. And now the Terracans wanted to know why. Could the humans trust them? Could they give away the key to their survival? "How much do we reveal?" Dallin muttered to himself. Yelton looked at him with hesitation. "Sir, if we don't act, if we don't make a move now, we'll be cornered. They'll take what they want, whether we agree to it or not. The decision is made." The human soldiers gathered in their command center, awaiting their orders. The Terracans had made it clear, they wanted answers. They wanted to know why humans didn't burn under the scorching sun, why they could withstand the unendurable. But Dallin had made a choice. The humans wouldn't just give their knowledge away. They wouldn't become the galaxy's next science experiment. "We'll meet them halfway," Dallin said. "But on our terms." He turned to Yelton. "Prepare the team. We're going to teach them something they won't forget. We'll show them why we are the ones who stand unscathed." Across the galaxy, the Zyandar, too, were preparing for what was to come. Their high mind had been growing more and more suspicious of the humans' silence. They knew the humans were holding something back. Something that was crucial to understanding their immunity. Something that could make the Zyandar a dominant force in the galaxy. But the Terracans had made their move, and the Zyandar would not sit idle. A dark plan was forming, one that would push humanity into a corner. But little did they know, humans weren't about to let anyone dictate their future. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity wasn't just another species, it was a force to be reckoned with. And the humans were ready to make their stand. The meeting had been set. The Terracans and Zyandar were ready to negotiate with the humans. It was a rare opportunity for diplomacy, but both sides were eager to gain something from the humans' immunity to the brutal radiation of the twin suns. Commander Dallin stood in front of his men, eyes steady and unflinching. They had received the call for talks, but the question was, what would they reveal? How much of their strength would they share? What would be the cost of their cooperation? The humans had faced war, hardship, and the ravages of time, but nothing had ever tested their resolve like this. Today would determine whether they were to remain a species of survivors, or become something more. The galaxy had its eyes on them. They were no longer just pawns in an endless war between alien races, they were now the focus of an entire galaxy's future. "We don't trust them," Dallin said, his voice calm but filled with resolve. "But we cannot ignore the opportunity to define the terms of this galaxy's future. The Terracans and Zyandar are powerful, but they don't know what they're dealing with. We are not their subjects." His words were clear and direct, and the team nodded in agreement. They had no intention of becoming pawns or lab experiments. This was their chance to show the galaxy that the humans were more than fragile creatures to be feared, they were stronger than any alien species had dared to imagine. The negotiation begins. The meeting was held in a neutral zone, an empty city on the outskirts of Veralis 5, a desolate place that neither the Terracans nor the Zyandar cared to claim as their own. A sprawling conference hall, made from the stone of a long-forgotten civilization, stood at the heart of the barren landscape. The Terracans arrived first, their heavy footsteps echoing in the empty hall. General Vortak led the way, his eyes scanning the room with the caution of a predator. Behind him, a group of high-ranking officers shuffled uneasily. They had heard of the humans' abilities, but none of them were truly prepared to face them in such an intimate setting. The Zyandar were next. Clixier, their leader, arrived with his usual unsettling silence, his exoskeleton gleaming under the faint lights. His insectoid eyes flickered with curiosity, yet there was a clear undercurrent of suspicion. The Zyandar were known for their cold logic, but this new development, the humans' resistance to radiation, had made even them uneasy. There was something about the humans that didn't add up. Finally, the humans entered the hall. Commander Dallin was the first to step forward, his posture straight and unwavering. His presence was commanding. His eyes locked onto both alien leaders, unflinching, as he surveyed them with quiet confidence. He knew what was at stake. "We've come to this table not out of weakness," Dallin said, his voice calm but firm. "But out of necessity. The time has come for the galaxy to understand us, not just as a species, but as something much more." Vortak eyed Dallin, his golden scales rippling with tension. "So, you've come to negotiate your immunity. Tell us, human, how do you survive when none of us can? What magic do you possess?" Dallin met his gaze squarely. "It's no magic, General. It's biology. We have adapted over time. We are not invincible, but we have learned to survive. To endure. It's the key to who we are." Clixier's antennae twitched. "You claim you have adapted. But your biology must be different. Show us how this works. Or we will take what we need by force." Dallin shook his head. "We won't share our knowledge that way. This is not a game. You want to understand, you need to earn our trust. Help us, and we'll share what we know. But do not mistake us for something to be dissected." The tension in the room grew. Both the Terracans and the Zyandar were accustomed to dominating their enemies, to breaking them down, forcing them into submission. But the humans weren't like that. They stood firm. They were not afraid. A moment of truth, for the first time in their lives, both the Terracans and Zyandar realized they weren't just dealing with a species to conquer. They were dealing with something they could not control. Dallin took a step back, his eyes still locked on both alien leaders. "We offer you a chance, a partnership. We can teach you how to adapt, how to endure the radiation of your worlds. But we won't give you everything. You'll have to prove you can be trusted." Vortak grunted. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" Dallin's response was simple. "Then you won't learn. You'll never understand why we are unscathed. You'll continue to destroy yourselves while we stand tall." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The humans had made it clear, this wasn't about technology or weapons. This was about cooperation and understanding. And, in that moment, the Terracans and Zyandar realized that, for the first time, they were not the most powerful species in the galaxy. The meeting room was heavy with silence. The words Dallin had spoken lingered in the air, an unspoken challenge that neither the Terracans nor the Zyandar had expected. Both alien factions were accustomed to being the dominant powers in the galaxy, but now, faced with humanity's unwavering stand, they were forced to re-evaluate their assumptions. General Vortak shifted uncomfortably, his sharp eyes darting toward the other leaders. For the first time in his life, he found himself questioning the strength of his people. He had always believed that force was the only language worth speaking. But the humans, they weren't speaking the same language. They had something far more dangerous, endurance. They had survived where others had faltered, and now, they held the upper hand. He glanced at Clixier, who was staring intently at Dallin. The Zyandar commander was equally unnerved by what he had just heard. For all their calculated intelligence and biological advantages, the Zyandar were vulnerable to solar radiation, the same as every other species in the galaxy. But the humans didn't burn. They stood unscathed in the very heart of what should have destroyed them. Clixier's voice was low, almost a whisper. They speak of endurance, but is it something they can share? Is it knowledge we can possess? Or is it something we must merely witness? Vortak's eyes narrowed, his mind working quickly. If the humans could truly offer knowledge, if they could teach their enemies to endure as they did, it could be a powerful advantage. But the humans had made it clear, this was not a gift to be given freely. They were not to be treated as an experiment. They were not going to be exploited. The Terrican general stood and faced Dallin once more. His voice was firm, but there was a hint of respect hidden beneath his usual cold demeanor. We'll agree to your terms, human. But know this, trust is not something earned in a day. If you betray us, the consequences will be severe. Dallin didn't flinch. We're not here to betray anyone. We're here to help ourselves, and help you in the process. The galaxy is changing, General. Whether you accept it or not, humanity is standing at the center of it. And you'll either learn to adapt with us, or you'll be left behind. For a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. The fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance. And then, after what seemed like an eternity, Vortak gave a single nod. We'll help you survive, Dallin added. But the real test begins now, not in your ability to survive the radiation, but in your ability to understand why we stand unscathed. A shifting balance with the agreement made, the tension in the room began to shift. The humans had made their stand, and both the Terricans and Zyandar were forced to confront their own vulnerabilities. The galaxy, for the first time, had seen a force stronger than any weapon they had ever known. The meeting ended without any dramatic gestures. The agreement, though fragile, had been made. There was no grand proclamation of peace or victory, but there was something far more significant, a new understanding. A shift in the balance of power in the galaxy. For the first time in centuries, the Terricans and Zyandar weren't looking down on another species, they were looking up to humans. Back in their command centers, both alien races began their preparations. The next phase of the relationship between humanity and the galaxy was unfolding. But both sides knew the stakes were higher than any war they had ever fought. There would be no more underestimating the humans. The next steps. Commander Dallin walked out of the conference hall, his mind still processing the meeting's outcome. The humans had secured their place in the galaxy, but the real work was just beginning. They had offered their knowledge, offered a chance for survival, but the galaxy had yet to understand what it meant to truly endure. Sergeant Yelton approached him, his expression a mix of skepticism and hope. So, sir, you think they'll actually go through with it? The Terricans and Zyandar, I mean? Dallin paused for a moment before responding, his voice steady. I don't know. But we've made them realize something important, we are not fragile. And the galaxy won't forget that. Yelton nodded, understanding the gravity of Dallin's words. Humans were no longer just survivors. They had become a force, a symbol of strength that could not be ignored. A new dawn, the galaxy was changing. The Terricans and Zyandar had learned what they could from the humans, but they also knew that this was not the end. Humanity had given them a chance, but it would be up to each species to decide whether they would learn to stand unscathed in the face of adversity, or crumble under the weight of their own pride. The humans had made their place in the galaxy known. They were not simply another species fighting for survival. They were the embodiment of endurance, of strength, beyond the understanding of anyone else. And for the first time in galactic history, the humans would make the rules. They would show the galaxy that strength was not only in domination, it was in resilience. Months had passed since the meeting between the humans, the Terricans, and the Zyandar. The uneasy truce had held, but it was not a truce born of peace, it was born of necessity. Both factions had learned what they could from humanity. They had tested and prodded, hoping to unlock the secrets behind the humans' immunity to the sun's deadly radiation. But now, humanity had become more than just a subject of study or a tool in their hands. The humans had transformed the galactic conversation. They had become a symbol, a living testament to something the galaxy had forgotten in its obsession with power and war. As the final meeting between the human representatives and the galactic powers unfolded, Commander Dallin stood before the gathering. It was the last step in their journey, no longer about showing their resilience, but about teaching others what they had learned. "We have shown you our strength," Dallin began, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "You've seen us stand unscathed, untouched by the radiation that kills your soldiers. But that strength isn't just in our biology. It's in our minds, our hearts, and our souls. It's in our ability to endure." A murmur rippled through the room. The Terracans and Zyandar were listening, and for the first time, they were no longer viewing humanity as a threat to be controlled. They were listening as if they finally understood, the humans were not just survivors. They were the teachers. The guides for something far greater than they could have imagined. "You asked us how we can stand unscathed under the twin suns," Dallin continued. "You asked what magic we possessed. But I tell you, it's not magic. It's a lesson in perseverance. In resilience. We've faced countless challenges, from within and without. And we've survived, not because we are invincible, but because we understand one simple truth: we endure. No matter how bad things get, we keep going." The Terracans and Zyandar exchanged glances. The words were simple, but they carried weight. They realized now that humanity wasn't just a species to be feared, it was a species to be respected, a species that had learned something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten: the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Dallin's gaze swept the room. The galaxy has been consumed by conflict and power struggles for too long. You all seek domination. You all seek to impose your will on others. But true strength is not about control. It's about sacrifice, adaptability, and the ability to survive. We may not have the most advanced technology. We may not have the might of your fleets. But we have something stronger than all of that." Dallin paused, letting his words sink in. The silence in the room was thick, as the Terracans and Zyandar began to grasp the deeper meaning behind humanity's strength. "We have the ability to adapt. To learn. To change. We have learned to survive by embracing the struggles and challenges that others feared. That is our strength. That is what makes us unscathed." The galaxy shifts. The meeting came to an end, and the delegates from the Terracan Dominion and the Zyandar Collective left, their minds heavy with the lesson they had just learned. Humanity had not only survived, it had transformed the understanding of what it meant to be truly powerful. Back on Earth, the news spread far and wide. People all across the planet began to understand that the true lesson the humans had taught the galaxy wasn't just about surviving harsh conditions or facing unimaginable challenges. It was about embracing what the world threw at you and finding a way to stand tall despite it. The humans, no longer viewed as just a fleeting species, had become a living example of resilience and strength. Their message wasn't just for the galaxy. It was a message for every individual, every being, who had ever faced an obstacle and thought they couldn't make it through. Endurance was not a trait for the strong alone, it was for everyone. For every person who had ever felt weak, lost, or defeated, humanity showed the ultimate truth: it was not about being invulnerable. It was about enduring, standing firm through the storm, through the darkness, and walking forward even when the road seemed impossible. And in the end, that was the lesson the galaxy would never forget. The humans did not burn under the light of the twin suns. And neither would they burn out in the hearts of the galaxy. They would stand, unscathed, for as long as they had the will to endure.